Whenever you're ready. All right, fantastic. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So again, thank you so much, Rachel, and everyone there at the Bloomfield Library for asking me to jump on tonight to really, share information on a very important topic that I'm very passionate about, which is really covering the importance of preparing and updating your will, right? So I've met people over the years that maybe they have a will prepared, but it was like 20 years ago, and a lot has changed, right? They don't live in the same place. Maybe they had kids since their time. Maybe their spouse changed. And so it's important to keep that information up to date. But again, my name is Kevin Palache. I'm the regional vice president for Connecticut and upstate New York for LegalShield, which has been around now for over 50 years. And will preparation is one of the key components of one of the services that we offer to our members for less than $30 a month, in addition to a whole host of other services. And my wife, Rochelle, and I have been able to, thanks to the program, be able to get our wills prepared when we got married, when we purchased our home, when we had our children. You can see here, my wife, Rochelle. We have, two phenomenal kids, my daughter, Abigail, who's now 12, and my son, Alex, who's 8. And so it was very important to us, when they were born, to make sure that we had it in writing. Heaven forbid something were to happen to both of us, and the tragedies happen every day. And we just wanted to do the responsible thing and make sure that they were held into account, or considered, right, in the event something were to happen, who would take care of them, right? That was something that's very important to us. And so tonight we're going to talk about where there's a will, there's a way, right? And so there is a will, right? To get your will prepared, to get your estate planning documents prepared, there's absolutely a way to get it done, right? And to be doing it in a cost-effective manner. And so before we go into the details on the information on today, a quick disclaimer. I am not an attorney. I don't play one on TV, right? I went to the school, actually graduated from Bloomfield High back in '96, and then went on from there to the University of Connecticut, where I studied finance, right? That was my background. And so, yes, I've been involved with LegalShield as an independent associate, and educating people in the community about the program now for over 19 years, right? But I'm not an attorney, so I'll make it clear, right? This is not legal advice or representation, and it's for general overview purposes only, right? So for advice specific to your situation, contact your attorney either before, during, and or after the creation of your will or your other estate planning documents, right? So just want to make sure I put it out there right up front. And so what we're going to discuss on today, really 4 main things. We're going to talk about what is estate planning, right? So what that looks like. We're going to talk about the top reasons to have a will and other estate planning documents prepared. We're going to talk about some barriers to estate planning, and some of these barriers are perceived barriers, right? And mental barriers, if you will. And some of them are actual barriers, right? That may prevent you from doing, even though you need to do these estate planning documents, right? Maybe a barrier for you. And we're going to talk about common estate planning options and terms as well, right? So these are things that maybe you've heard, in the past, but we're going to kind of define exactly what they are. So let's start off with first, go back here, with just defining, what is your estate, right? It's basically all the assets that you've accumulated, over the years, right? And so obviously we all work hard for the things that we have, right? So it might include obviously your homes, right? And maybe you have one home, maybe you have multiple homes, right? In multiple states. Wouldn't that be nice, right? Bank accounts. Digital assets, right? So I'm sure there's a point in time where this was not even a consideration, but times have absolutely changed, right? So digital assets, things like your username and your passwords, right? To be able to get access to maybe your online bank accounts, right? Maybe there's important documents, especially if you have a small business, that those documents are essential for the ongoing operation of your business, right? So these digital assets, right, is a whole other area that you want to be considering as you're putting together your estate planning documents. Obviously, any investments that you have, personal property. So even if you don't have a home, right, if you don't have a house, if you're in an apartment, well, within the apartment, hopefully, right, you've got furniture. Maybe you have vehicles, maybe it's family heirlooms, right? And so you want to make sure all those things are considered as you're going through your estate planning documents. Also, assets that you control, And so this includes things like life insurance, if you have an LLC or corporation, and retirement plans, right? So that's kind of a broad overview of your actual estate. Now, the three main goals of estate planning. So number one is to manage your estate during your lifetime, right? So while you're alive. So we'll talk about some of the, and there's multiple forms of powers, power of attorney. So we'll talk about two of them on tonight. We're going to talk, the second one is to distribute your estate after you passed away, right? After your death. And then also to minimize the costs, taxes, and stress as it relates to your passing. So unfortunately, oftentimes if you do not have a will prepared, right, it leaves a lot of stress and additional work for the people that we leave behind. And oftentimes we have conversations with people, and sometimes they say, "Oh, well, I don't need a will, right? I don't need a will, right?" And we say, "You're exactly right. When we pass away, we were not going to need a will, right? It's not for you. It's for the people that you leave behind, right? It's for them." And so it's very important, as we consider the people that we love and care about. Some people kind of term it or coin it, the phrase of, it's kind of like a final love letter, right, to your family members, to your friends, right, to know that you thought ahead of them, right, before that occurred, right. And so it helps to minimize your costs in some cases, taxes, and definitely relieves a lot of stress by having these estate planning documents in place in advance. And so let's talk about some of the, again, some of them are perceived, right? And some of them are, maybe some actual barriers to getting your estate planning documents prepared. Number one, some people say they don't know, right, the reasons why they need estate planning, right? And hopefully we will cover and hit on some of those reasons why as we go through on today, or making sure that you have it in writing, who gets what, right? You've worked so hard for any assets that you have, but you want to make sure that it goes to the people that you love and care about the way that you wanted to go to them without causing additional stress to your family, right? Finding the right attorney. So you may understand the importance of getting it done, but some of us may realize there's literally over 100 different areas of law. So, how do you find the right attorney to be able to help you with, getting those estate planning documents prepared? And then when you find where you might think there's a right attorney, right, they might tell you how much it costs, and you're like, no, I have the wrong attorney, right? So cost, right, of preparation, right? I met a young lady recently, and she was at least lighthearted about it. She was joking around. She was like, "Hey, oh, man, I wish I met you about 3 months ago for that LegalShield thing, because I just paid over $1,200, right, to get our will prepared," right? So it could get pretty costly to get it prepared, but you want to make sure it's done the right way regardless, right? So it may be an investment if you decide to go that route, but the bottom line is you want to make sure you have these important documents in place. Also, you find that oftentimes people procrastinate, and now, depending on when you're viewing this, obviously if folks are in live, we're the beginning of the year, right? And so a lot of people have New Year's resolutions to lose weight, to make more money, right, to whatever, right, those goals are. And oftentimes, right, this is maybe one of the things that they have on their list. And oftentimes what we see is that people know the importance of getting a will prepared, right? I think we, for the most part, know it's important to have these documents in place. But oftentimes we put off, we procrastinate. It's not an exciting topic, right, to talk about, one that you want to talk about, death, right? But it's a reality. And so oftentimes we procrastinate, or might be even intimidated about the process, right? And we'll talk about, kind of how the process looks, before we wrap up on today. But those are some things, there's some reasons why sometimes we kind of put off to the future, right? And so it's important for us to now kind of roll up our sleeves and kind of get to work with it. And what's interesting, and what I found for me and for us with getting the will prepared, it's like one of those things where before you have it, you think about it all the time, right? You're like, man, I really need to do this. I really need to do this. I really need to do this, right? You hear about someone maybe passing away without a will. We've all heard, I won't even mention any names, but superstars that, and you're shocked, right, to hear that they didn't have their estate planning documents, put together. And now they have family members fighting over assets. And so, and you like, oh man, I really should get mine done, right? That's kind of how I thought before, we got our wills prepared. But guess what? When you actually get your estate planning documents prepared, guess what happens? You no longer think about it anymore, right? Why? Because that great weight has been lifted from your shoulders. And then obviously we encourage people to do like an annual review in case anything has changed, right? That's pertinent to the will. But I found it, and at least in my particular situation, it relieved a lot of stress, right? Because we've seen kind of what can happen, when those documents are not prepared. And so now that we're able to kind of check that, and for those of you who are like me, you like checking stuff off your list, right? It was a big box that we were able to check off, right? When we finally got those estate planning documents prepared. So these are some of the barriers that we typically hear, but here's one that we never hear, right? They don't think they're going to die, right? I don't think I'm going to die. We've never heard that particular reason or excuse, right, for not getting an estate planning document, documents prepared. And so we all know this is a reality, right? It's unfortunate, but we all know we're not getting out of this life alive, right? And so if we know that, right, if we know that's an absolute guarantee, right? They say the only guarantees in life, right, is death and taxes, right? Two guarantees that you have in your lifetime, right? So if we know this is an absolute fact for absolutely 100% of us, then we, at some point, right, we've got to face the reality that we need to get these things prepared. And so here are some of the common maybe terminology and some of the options that you may have heard of, hopefully in the past, as it relates to estate planning, right? So we'll talk about passive, dying intestate. We'll talk about two specifically. There's a lot of different, I don't want to kind of bombard you with a lot of information. We'll talk about two specific types, powers of attorney, jointly held assets, beneficiary designation and contracts, living trusts, and we'll talk about, obviously, the last will and testament as well. So let's start off with first, intestate, right? Which is basically no planning at all, right? That means that nothing has been done, nothing has been documented. And unfortunately, last time I heard the statistics on this, is well over half the population, right, don't have their will prepared. That people, adults who obviously should and have these documents prepared, they just don't, right? The majority of people don't have them in place. And again, I think it's because those reasons we talked about, right? Lack of education about the importance of it, what can happen to their loved ones, and the stress that it causes if they don't have it in place, right? The cost, so again, those are some barriers there. But if you die without a will, right, it's called dying intestate, right? For each state has designated by statute how your estate will be distributed. So we always share with folks, if you don't take the time to prepare your will, then guess what, right? The state that you live in has one for you, and you may not like it, right? Distribution is controlled by the statute, such as the percentage your spouse and your children will receive, right? And so very important. And I'll share even something here as it relates to kids, and the importance of having some of the specifics there in your estate planning documents, because a lot of these times these things are kind of equally distributed, but your children may not be in equal financial situations. So for example, if you have two children, you may have one child that's maybe financially independent, they're doing well financially, maybe they're in a situation they're not married, they don't have any kids, right? Maybe they make a six-figure income and they're good. And you may have another child that is married, maybe has 3 or 4 children, and maybe is struggling a little bit, right? Maybe is not able to make ends meet. Would you want your assets to be, in that situation, distributed equally amongst those 2 children? Or would you say, yes, I want to give the 2 children part of my estate, but I need to make sure the house goes to this particular child over here because they're in an apartment right now, and I want them to own my home so they can move in with their family. You guys get this? So again, it's very important that we kind of consider these things, right, as we're going through, right, our estate planning. So number 2, right, are powers of attorney. So this is when you grant another person the power and authority to make legal decisions on your behalf, right? I'm going to really talk about 2 of them on tonight. The first is the financial power of attorney. So these come into place. So these are obviously why you're alive, right? That you have the ability to kind of utilize these 2 powers of attorney specifically. And so let's say you do have a situation where you have an unexpected illness, right? Or an accident, right? You could be doing, and here's the thing that we share, bad things happen to good people all the time, right? I think we're all adults, we know you could be doing all the right things and still have bad things happen. And so that's why, these types of documents are so important, like to have in place beforehand. So with the financial power of attorney, if you do have an unexpected illness, accident, you're in the hospital, you can't speak, you can't express your wishes. This expresses your wishes for you, right? It speaks for you. So it enables us to know, right, who you want. So with the financial power of attorney specifically, right, it's a power of attorney that will manage your assets, and if you choose, give your agent the authority to make certain personal and business decisions for you. So guess what? When we're in the hospital, guess what keeps happening, right? Bills keep coming in the mail, right? The post person, right? They're still delivering mail every single day. And so when those bills come, right, what happens at that point, right? So this gives you the ability to put someone in charge, right, to make those financial decisions on your behalf, right? To make sure that your mortgage maybe stays, up to date, right? That your cell phone stays, those types of things. So the financial power of attorney, right? Then you have the medical power of attorney, which is usually the term that people hear more often. Right? With a medical power of attorney, right, it's a living will medical directive that can provide for the appointment of a specific person to make medical decisions for you if you aren't able to do so yourself, right? So if you're in a situation where you're on life support, right, who would you want, right, to make those medical decisions on your behalf? So what's an example of the importance of this? I spoke to a gentleman, this is, many years ago, and he was sharing the story of, his father, right? His father, fell ill and he was on life support, right? And he had, an infection. I mean, he had all sorts of pain. I mean, the doctors actually told him that, his father was in pain, but they were keeping him sedated, right? And he knew, and, he was on life support, and he knew from his conversations with his father that he would not ever want to be in that situation, right? That's just, based on the conversation, relationship he had with his father, he knew, like, my dad would not ever want to be in this situation, right? And you have other people who might be on the opposite end, right? I know some people are like, no, keep me plugged in. Miracles happen every day, right? The doctors get better every day. They might find a solution, right? So you have some folks who like, keep me as long as it takes, plugged in as long as it takes, right? But you have others who say, no, I don't ever want to be in that situation. That's where he knew his father wanted to be. But unfortunately, right, he had siblings and they didn't agree with him. They're like, no, we're gonna give it more time, right? And then his father was in pain, right, during this time frame. And unfortunately, his father eventually passed away. But the stress that was created, right, from those disagreement, that argument, right? Obviously, you can imagine people get very emotional in that type of situation, right? Their relationship, right, has never been the same, right? And so it's so important, right, to make sure that, again, we put these things in place in advance, just in case, right, these things occur. Right. Number 3 are jointly held assets. So these assets are held in the names of, 2 people. Assets held with the right of survivorship passed automatically, right, to the survivor upon death of the first person, right? So if you and your spouse have a bank account, for example, and both your names are on there, one of you passes away, boom, automatically transfers to the other, right? So no need for probate and all that because both your names are on there. Jointly held asset avoids probate in some situations, right? Carries some risk and others. So same thing there in the reverse, right? We've seen it where, yes, you and the other person are on there, you pass away, but you don't want the other person on that, right? Maybe things have changed and, years have passed, and that person who was on there, on that jointly held asset, is not someone that you wanted to continue to be on there, but you never made that update, right? So that's what we say is good to look at all these things at least once a year to say, okay, is there anything that I need to refresh, right? Anything that I need to update? Can help reduce taxes in some situations, and again, does not avoid probate if both joint tenants die, right? Because now, it has to go into probate to determine, okay, who's going to get the assets from this particular account, for an example. Number 4, right, is beneficiary designation. So if certain designations are in place for some assets, the assets pass regardless of provisions in the will. Right? In this case, probate is not needed for assets controlled by a beneficiary designation. So what are some examples of this? Property held by trustee for the benefit of the beneficiaries. Beneficiary designations. This is very important, right? For life insurance, investments, pensions, retirement accounts. Because sometimes we hear folks say, well, yeah, my life insurance, but I want to get my will done. So they know, no, right? It's already determined in your life insurance policy. It already dictates within that policy who the beneficiaries are, right? You don't want to wait months, right, for things to go through in probate to be able to get funds that you're supposed to receive from that life insurance policy, right? And so that life insurance policy is going to dictate, who's you have listed as the beneficiary, right, of that insurance policy, right? So same thing with your, 401k, your Roth IRA, your retirement funds, right? And so hopefully this maybe for some folks might be a reminder. Be like, oh, you know what? I do have life insurance, and hopefully right away who's on there. But sometimes things change. We've had, a situation where a friend of mine, he actually, him and his wife, they had their will prepared, and the person they had listed as the executor for their estate passed away in her 30s, right? Didn't expect it, wasn't ill for an extended period, anything like that. Just, we all know, I'm sure we've all had family loved members that this happened, but, here today and tomorrow not here. But as a result of that, he and his wife had to sit down, like, okay, who's gonna, be the executor now? Yeah, who's gonna take care of our kid? All these things they had to refresh as a result. So that's what I'm saying. Even for the beneficiary designation, even if it's something that's handled outside of your other estate planning documents, very important to make sure that you determine from year to year, okay, is this the same person I want to have assets for my life insurance or for my investment accounts? Number 5, living trust. So this basically distributes your assets, similar to a will. It can help you eliminate or reduce estate taxes. Usually what we find is that, people have a high net worth, right? If you got multiple homes, we see that there's more of a need for this. It could avoid probate, right? I've set up in certain ways. Not needed for every estate, so we share with folks, if you are, 83 years old, you live in an apartment, you don't own a home, right? You may not want to spend a whole bunch of money getting a trust prepared, right? Because it might not be necessary in your specific situation, right? So that's how we always share with folks, that you want to make sure that you discuss these things with your attorney to determine, hey, is this what I need, right? And we hear about all the things that are available, but is this what I need in my particular situation, right? So if you want or need a trust, right, you should hire an attorney, right, obviously to help with that process. And then number 6, is your last will and testament, right? It's going to designate to whom you give your estate, right? You've worked your whole life for your home, your vehicles, right? Not for that purpose, but you've accumulated, right, these things over the years, right? Your home, your vehicle, maybe it's like specific family heirlooms. Heard an actual kind of testimonial from a young lady recently that collects angels. Like that's what she does. Like she's very passionate about it. She has like over 100 different types of angels that she's collected over the years, right? And so she has a specific person that she wants to be able to get all of those, because it means a lot to her, and people know it means a lot to her, which means it means a lot to them, right, for the loved ones, right? So it might be things like that. It designates your personal representative, right? So again, who's your executor for your estate, right? Designates the guardian of your minor children. Again, this was something that was very important for my wife and I to have this in place. And so we want to make sure if something happens to us, the last thing in the world we want is for a state or someone that we've never met before in our life to make any decisions as to who takes care of our children. I spoke with a gentleman recently. He mentioned he met with a couple, and they were talking about the kind of services that are offered. And when we talked about the will, like, oh no, we don't need a will, we're all good. And he was asking, well, who would take care of your kids if something were to happen to you guys? Who would take care of your kids? And both of them, he said, literally, like practically at the same time, said, oh, my parents will take them. And then the question then comes up, well, you guys do realize you have 2 different sets of parents, right? And so these are some of the things that we always share with folks to really be cognizant of, and again, make those decisions now, so that people obviously will be able to respect those wishes and know and be able to do it peacefully. So no, we're going to respect the wishes of our loved one, right? This is what they wanted, so this is what we're going to do. So one for each spouse is important. Obviously, make sure they're in alignment with each other. Most must be properly executed to be effective, right? So it's not just getting those kind of the paperwork. You want to make sure it's notarized, witnessed, right? A copy of a will is not your will, right? So this is something that I've learned, over the years as well. A copy of your will is not your will. You can't bring a copy of your will to probate court they will not acknowledge that, right? It has to be the original, it has to be notarized, it has to be witnessed, right? And so you want to make sure whoever you identify or selected as your executor, they know where the original copy of the will is, right? If you put it in a safe, a fireproof safe, where's the key to get into the safe? Where is the safe? At least give them those basics so they know where to go, when that time comes, right? And again, it doesn't avoid probate, just makes the process a lot easier because you have these things in place, right? You don't have to argue and wonder, right, who's going to get what in that situation. So the key here is to take the first step. So again, as I mentioned, a lot of us, we understand the importance of having our estate planning documents in place. But now it's time to take action, right? Now it's time to stop procrastinating. And so, part of what we do, with our LegalShield program, we help with estate planning documents, right? So your will, your living will, the healthcare, financial power of attorney, right, is included with our services, $30 a month for our program. So, we find an affordable way to give people access to the justice system, right? Our company's been around for now over 50 years. We actually last year celebrated our 50-year anniversary. We've been around for, since 1972. We have over 4 million people who are protected with the service throughout the US and Canada, which is why it's possible for just $30 a month to get access, because of that group buying power. So our vision is really to provide equal access to the liberty, equality, opportunity, and justice that everyone deserves, right? So especially for me, as it relates to the will preparation, where we never want, someone to be in a situation they don't have these documents prepared, they don't have their will, they don't have their, their healthcare and their financial power of attorney prepared because they cannot afford it, right? Because they don't have hundreds or $1,000+ to be able to get these documents in place, right? So it's very important. That's why we're so passionate about it, to make sure people know it's an option, right? You might decide to go another route, which is fine, but our objective is to educate people in the community that this service is available. Obviously, we've been featuring a lot of different publications, A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau as well. And so there's other service. I'm not going to go through the details, but in addition to the will preparation, we've used it for personal legal advice on personal issues. You can use it, they write letters and make phone calls on behalf. So I actually got off the phone with someone earlier, what issue with repairs on updates done in her home that weren't done properly. They actually damaged parts of her home, right? And so she wants to not only be able to get advice, but potentially have a letter or a phone call made on her behalf, right? Review documents, things like uncontested divorce, adoption, separation, are included within our program. If we get a speeding ticket in or out of state, and obviously anything that's not covered in the other areas, we get a discount off the standard hourly rate for the law firm. I always joke around with people. I'm like, no, you can't rob a bank and think for $30, right? Everything's gonna be included. So we always share folks be reasonable with the expectations. But for the day-to-day life events issues, 90% of the times are included, including the will preparation, and they do annual updates. Because like I mentioned, we've done ours 4 times now, utilizing the program. So very important, right, that we keep these things up to date. We even get 24/7 emergency access, and it covers the immediate family, the member, their spouse or significant other is included, and then children up to age of 26, just as long as they're living at home or going to school full time if they're out of state. And then sometimes we have grandparents who have custody of their grandkids. So dependent children on under age 18 are covered. And any physically or mentally disabled child, just as long as they're living at home and unable to work, are covered for the life of the membership, just as long as they're living at home on the plan. So let's talk about how to start preparing now, right? So regardless of how you decide to go about the process of getting your estate planning documents prepared, hopefully at this point, you've made the decision, right, that you're going to get these documents in place. So some things just to realize that that you're going to be probably asked for as you go through this process. It's all things right? So this is why it was so easy. And again, I think a lot of us in our mind, when we hear estate planning, we're like, oh my God, this is going to be a complicated process. It's going to take forever. And my wife and I were pleasantly surprised at how simple the process was, right? Because oftentimes we know, who we want to get what, right? Whether it's a spouse, whether it's children, whether it's a brother or sister, but typically we know, we just don't know how to kind of put it in writing and get everything documented the right way, which is the whole point, right, of having the attorney do that on your behalf. But it's all things right? And so name, date of birth, right? If you're married, marriage, date and the location. Dependent children, right? Their names and birth dates. And, again, if you have grandchildren, so you may say, hey, I want to leave these particular assets, not to my kids, but specifically to my grandkids. Special needs children, right? Selecting a custodian. So again, in this case, if you do have young children, you have minors, who's going to take custody of your kids in that situation? And our program actually includes something called a minor trust, where it actually dictates that who would take custody of your kids. And sometimes you have two different people, and ideally you have the same person doing this, but you could actually set up where you have one person who actually physically is taking care of the children, and another person who's actually taking care of the finances, right? Where you can say, look, I don't want this child to get access, right, to the finances, to my estate until they are 21 years old, right? 23 years old, whatever age you determine. But until then, I want so-and-so, right? Whoever you select to really manage the finances until that time, right? So selecting a custodian, disinheritance, right? And special requests. And this is kind of, this is kind of funny, so they're saying, even one of the attorneys that we spoke with was talking about disinheritance. And so, he said, well, you could just leave someone out the will, right? You said you can have your will in place, and you've got maybe two children, and one of them you're like, I don't want to leave anything for whatever reason, right? You don't want to leave anything for them, or maybe it's another family member, right? And you just intentionally leave them out the will. And it's funny, the attorney said, well, that's one way to do it, but just in case they come back and say, oh, well, my mom, they just simply forgot about me. They forgot to add me, right? They're using the example like, go ahead and put them in the will and leave them $1, right? So that way they know that you didn't forget about them, right? You put them in the will, but you selected or opted not to give them much within the estate. So anyway, start preparing now. So there's some things you can add in there. Asset information, obviously, real estate assets, motor vehicles, retirement plans, your life insurance policies, as I mentioned there. Make sure you know who you have listed as a beneficiary. Investments in banking, your digital assets. I talked about earlier, who's getting the login, right? If you have important documents and files that are available electronically, and the life request. Sometimes people have special arrangements. There's some folks now who are literally planning out their entire funeral in advance, right? I mean, they, and again, for everything, they decide like, hey, I want to plan out, like they know where they want to be buried, right? Who are going to make their arrangements. They put together the program. And so, if you find it so fit, right, that you want to be able to be in that position to kind of have those details in order, right? So some things to keep in mind. Treatment of remains, right? Do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? Pet care, right? This is very important, right? So for those of you who have, have pets, that they can be like family, right? They are family, right? And so, well, who's going to take care, right, of the dog, the cat, the gerbil, right? Whatever, in your passing. Social media accounts. Who's going to manage, especially if you have it for maybe like a business, right, ongoing, right? What's going to happen with your social media account? Do you want it shut down and close? Do you want to leave it open, but no one, so what are the options there? Intellectual property, right? So if you have, copyright, patent, these types of things, right? How do you want to have those things handled? So these are the conversations, right, that you want to have with your attorney, right? So hopefully that was somewhat helpful to you. Hopefully maybe you got some ideas. You maybe thought about some things that maybe you haven't thought about in the past as relates to specifically, going through the, estate planning process. And so we're going to wrap up. And this is my contact information. So if you have any follow-up questions, now, as I mentioned, right, I can't answer any legal questions specific. Maybe you want to find out more about our program. Maybe you have some general questions. But if you want to reach out to me for any reason, here's my contact information, my direct phone number, my email address, so you can email me directly there. If you want to find out more about what we do at LegalShield and specifically our legal plan, you could go to familyrightsplan.com. That's directly to my side as an independent associate. And we also, just as an aside, we're also able to offer our services as an employee benefit, right? So if you own a company, doesn't matter if it's 3 employees, 300 or 3,000, we could actually offer it for $22 a month instead of $30 a month, right, when it's offered as an employee benefit. And then we also have small business plans that are available. If you only own small business, maybe you have rental property, we have options there. Also do several workshops. So it's obviously a will education workshop. So if you have a particular group that you'd like me to do this workshop for, feel free to reach out directly for that. We do talks also specifically on things like time management, goal setting, especially with the new year, we're doing that more personal development, which I think is so important, right? To make sure that we're working and growing and developing ourselves mentally as well. So these are, obviously topics that I'm passionate about, these 4 specifically. So feel free to call again or email with any questions. And I'll also, for those who are at least joining us live, put my information in the chat as well. And so with that, Rachel, I'll turn it back over to you. I think you mentioned you wanted to stop the recording, I guess, for the